Kit O'Brien. So you've been divorce lawyer for how long?
For over 30 years for my sins.
Okay. A mum of one.
Yes.
And keen aqua aerobics participant.
Determined aqua aerobics participant is probably more accurate.
So I have read some articles last night on your role, and this one is from lawnow.org, and the title is "Are Lawyers Susceptible to Vicarious Trauma, Secondary Trauma?" And studies have shown that legal professionals are more susceptible to vicarious trauma than mental health professionals. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm surprised. I am surprised if we are thought more susceptible than mental health professionals, but I certainly think that we are susceptible, particularly as family lawyers, because we are embedded in our clients' lives at a very difficult time for them. And certainly well-being amongst family lawyers is something that is very much at the forefront of discussions and considerations at the moment. There are a lot of programmes coming up about practice supervision and family law-based well-being, particularly aimed at family lawyers. I think it may be that I've been doing it for 30 years and I have found a way of making it work that I cope with, and I feel able to do the best for my clients without harming myself, I hope. But I suspect that there are concerns for the next generations coming through, that it's really important to make sure that they don't burn out, because we are far more available to our clients than we were when I first started. You know, we have email, we have texts, we have WhatsApp. We can, if we allow ourselves, be contactable 24/7, 365. And I think the risk of burnout is probably much greater. And I suspect that's where the sort of reports that you're reading stem from.
Mm. Well, the article goes on, it says, lawyers have reported that they feel powerless to adequately help their traumatised client, which makes it difficult for them to be optimistic about their work. As a result, some can experience continuous numbness, detachment, emotional exhaustion and frustration.
Gosh.
Have you experienced any of them?
Well, we all experience frustration at times. And I think we all have clients who we feel we are unable to help as much as we would like to because we can't give them the answers they want. Because a lot of the time what they want is to make it all go away. And we can't do that. But another thing that has changed enormously since I first started practicing is that we now have a range of options. We have counsellors, we have divorce coaches. There's a whole raft of people who we can join our clients up with, who will hopefully be able to give them support in a way that we can't, because it's not what we're trained to do.
Okay. And finally, on that article, it says criminal and family law lawyers may also find it difficult to leave their work at the office and find it negatively, or can negatively, affect their home life. They may find themselves disengaging from their personal lives or developing a sense of hopelessness themselves.
I'm sure there are some for whom that's true. I suspect it's particularly true for criminal lawyers who are, in many ways, a dying breed, because you are finding fewer and fewer young lawyers who want to come through and work all hours, being on duty rotas, being called to police stations, working almost entirely on legal aid. There are fewer and fewer of those who actually want that sort of life. And I think unless there are sea changes in how that's structured and remunerated, it is going to be a dying breed. But that's for another conversation. From a family law perspective, I think certainly it is possible to be too available to your clients unless you are very disciplined. I have been very disciplined from the outset, not because I don't care about my clients, but because I want to make sure that when I am looking after them, I am utterly focused on them. And when I'm not working, I'm utterly focused on not working. So I run two phones. So I have a home mobile and a work mobile, and the two don't overlap in any way. And at weekends and when I go on holiday, the work phone isn't with me. Because I know myself. People say, well, why don't you just push your emails to your mobile phone and not look at them? because I know I dive straight down that rabbit hole and I wouldn't come up again. And that's not healthy for me and it's not healthy for my clients. You know, they need me to have downtime so that I can focus better on them when I am working.
So very boundaried.
Yes.
Very boundaried. So, but what about when you first started? When you were a young lawyer, did you find it more difficult?
Well, they didn't have mobile phones.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I am that old.
But in terms of leaving it at the office?
We didn't really have much choice because we didn't have email. We did, you know, I qualified in 1991 and we didn't have email. We didn't have mobile phones. Nobody could get hold of you.
But maybe sort of from an emotional point of view, the cases, you must see some difficult cases, people going through very difficult emotional stuff.
Yes.
So
You have to learn to leave it at the office. And that's not because you don't care. But if you don't, you will burn out and then you can't take care of your clients at all.
Sure.
It's something that I have tried to be very disciplined about right from the outset. You know, yes, sometimes I'll be about to switch the light off at night and I'll think, oh, did I do so-and-so? And my phone's beside the bed and I'm sure it shouldn't be, but it is. And that's the home phone. And I'll ping myself an email to work. And then it's done. It's parked. I've flagged it up to deal with when I log on the following morning. And that's done.
Did you know you wanted to go into law?
No,
How did you find yourself in law?
by mistake.
Really?
Yeah. I did a drama degree, which is not the usual starting point for lawyers, and came out of university with no real idea what I wanted to do. So I did a secretarial course on the basis that I would always have a way of earning my living. And we were supposed to do some work experience. It was supposed to be typing and secretarial work experience, and we had to find our own place to go. The only person my parents knew who worked in an office was a solicitor, who, when asked, said, yes, of course I could come for work experience, but obviously didn't listen to the bit about secretarial. So I arrived, and on the first morning, instead of being handed over to what would have then been the typing pool, I was handed over to the partner in the criminal team, who was delighted because I was a bit older than most of the work experience people he got. He'd got rather a lot of trials going on in the Crown Court that week, and he needed somebody to sit behind counsel. So suddenly I was in Oxford Crown Court, sat behind counsel with a notebook, taking a note, and having a blast. And strangely, I had such a good time that I kind of forgot to say that I'm really not supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be doing the typing. And at the end of 3 weeks, he said, you ought to think about doing this. And if you want to, I will write you references for law school, and you should come back here for your training contract. So I did, he did, I did, and the rest is history.
Something on the previous point we were talking about leaving it in the office. Have you had close friends that have gone through? So friends that are family friends or friends that are close to you that you've grown up with, that you've known for a long time, and found it difficult to not give advice, found it difficult to stay out of their divorce?
I tend to stay out unless I'm asked.
Okay.
I have looked after, acted for people who were friends, although not the closest of friends, and they have understood that they may have contacted me as a friend initially, but once we move on to a work relationship, then they respect the boundaries just as I respect their boundaries. And it's never been a problem. I have had a couple of very close friends who, thinking that their relationship was in crisis, have asked to talk to me, and I have talked to them, but it's never come to anything.
Gender differences in the consequences of divorce. This is another article I found. This is by a sociologist called Thomas Leopold, who studies and looks into family dynamics, divorce, how it affects men and women differently. So this is a summary from the findings of the article that I found. And the last sentence is, overall, women's burden from divorce tends to be more prolonged and related to economic status, whereas men's burden is more immediate but short-lived, affecting their psychological well-being. So do you see this? Do you see the difference in men and women and how it affects them?
It's an interesting point because from an emotional perspective, it affects them both equally.
Of course.
But with men, there is still far too great a tendency to try and be strong and hide what they're feeling and hide their grief, because it is grief. And I try very hard to make sure that when they're talking with me, when they're meeting with me, they know that it is a safe space where they are not judged in any way. And if it gets too much and they cry, I'm not going to think any less of them. Sure. And that I provide someone, because they will have very supportive friends and family. But they may not feel able to let down their guard with them. They may not want to be perceived as they see it, as weak. So I think certainly both genders will suffer emotionally, but men may well bottle it up more, which isn't very good for them. And it's really important that they find an outlet that they can let go, they can express their feelings. It shouldn't necessarily be me. I am their lawyer, not a therapist, but if I'm all they've got, then so be it. The long-term outcomes, I suppose it depends on how traditionally you look at things, because you could say that the wife is going to be looking after the children, so she's got a longer period when she's effectively, to potentially a large extent, depending on how they're dividing the care of their children, single parenting. You could say that the husband is potentially losing out because the house has got to be preserved for the children, so their economic situation is difficult initially until such time as the children are older. But, things are changing. People are sharing the care of their children far more, as they should. The children need both sets of parents, and neither parent has the monopoly on being the best place for the person for the children to be with. And also, far more women are working than they were years ago. So the financial inequality may be less pronounced. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure you can necessarily put a label on it.
When you said about people, because when we've spoken before, you've said about you can be sometimes the first person that gets kind of the whole story, the whole emotional story. Do you find is that a common thing with a lot of the people that come to you? That it's been kind of building up in them, and then you are the one that it goes to?
Sometimes they come and see me far more quickly than they need to. Sometimes something will have been brewing for ages and they finally think I better take some advice. But others, their life implodes. They are suddenly told, this is over. I don't want this marriage to continue. There are people who won't have seen it coming at all, and it is a complete cataclysm for them. A grenade has been dropped into their lives. And they don't know what to do. And they're sort of grasping for things that they think might be a good idea to do. So they see a lawyer. And so they come to me at a stage where all they're able to do is just go sort of blah and blur, offload everything.
Sure. Do you find it difficult to carry that sometimes? It's
hard, but you've got to give them space, because it may be that at that time what they need is somewhere that they can just do a brain dump. And they've got so many questions and no answers. What they really want, as I said earlier, is for it all to go away. Sure. And I can't do that. What I can do is to destroy some of the myth, to tell them things they need to hear, not necessarily things they want to hear, and give them a roadmap so that, I can say to them, well, we can do this, or this isn't going to happen, and hopefully enable them to move forward with a slightly more realistic idea of where it's all going.
Tell me about the myth that you said there.
Everybody knows somebody who's been in exactly the same situation as the person they're talking to. And when you go and see that lawyer, you make sure that, you get what you're entitled to. And don't tell them you can't have your day in court, because that's what you need. Well, no two people are the same. So no two cases are the same. So no two outcomes are the same. So I know somebody who was in exactly your situation and this is what they got and you should hold out for it too, just doesn't exist. Every situation, as I say, is different. And because everybody knows somebody, people will find that they are buried under well-meaning advice from family, friends, contacts, the bloke down the pub. And they need to know the reality. And they need to know that the one thing they do not want is their day in court, because that will be financially and emotionally very costly indeed. And court is a blunt instrument.
So they come with their own expectation.
Yes.
And are there times where they want to be stubborn and stick to that expectation, and you have to keep sort of bringing home that actually...
Absolutely. And ultimately, my job is to do what they instruct me to do. If they want me to instruct me to do something and to pay for me to do something that is completely harebrained, ultimately they are entitled to do that. My job is to say, well, yes, of course I'll do this, if you want me to. But I don't think it's a good idea. And this is why I don't think it's a good idea. This is what I think is going to happen if you do this. Are you really sure that's what you want? So sometimes my job is to save people from themselves. Sometimes you can't. And people will insist on taking a course of action that you really don't think is going to benefit them. You hope that you can avoid them getting to the point where they're going to be in court and facing costs orders against them because what they want to do really is that mad. But ultimately, people are individuals.
Do you find that hard when you've instructed, when you've given advice? Sorry, but they instruct you. But when you've given advice and you know that they've instructed you to do something that isn't going to be in their best interest.
You find it worrying because from 30 plus years of experience, you know full well how this is going to pan out. You know that it's not going to be what they think it's going to be. And you know that there is a risk that later down the line they're going to say, well, why didn't you tell me this was going to happen? So occasionally what you have to do, all you can do is make sure that you have very clearly documented the advice that you have given, that you have very clearly recorded the client acknowledging that that's the advice you have given. And sometimes we get clients to sign disclaimers where we say, I have advised you to do ABC. You have told me that you want to do X, Y, or Z. I have told you that if I do X, Y, Z, this is what I think is going to happen. You have confirmed that you understand this, but you still want me to do X, Y, Z.
Mm. Just in case they come back and say, why didn't you tell me this? Yeah.
Because when it does go wrong, as you knew sadly it would, and they're angry and frustrated because it hasn't gone the way they wanted it to, they are inevitably casting around for someone to blame, and you are a very easy target.
Of course, yeah.
With insurance.
Thankfully.
But you don't. Obviously, we have the insurance because we are not perfect. But you really don't want to have to use it. So you will have clients where the best you can say is, I have covered my rear. That's the best you can do. What you often find with that sort of client is that there will be a parting of the ways because they feel that they may decide to act in person. They may decide that say that they want to paddle their own canoe, and that if you don't think you can achieve for them what they want to achieve, they'll go off and do it for themselves. Still goes wrong though.
Of course. So from your perspective, what psychological sort of changes do you see in people through the process?
People vary. There are some people who, it's like a bereavement, so you get the same bereavement curve. People go through anger, sadness, acceptance. And some people you will see moving forwards, moving upwards. And it's great because you see them starting to realise that there is a life out there and that things are going to get better. And you're walking beside them as they take those steps to somewhere better. Others are hell-bent on not doing that. I have had clients who have said to me that their former spouse has ruined their life. And that's only going to happen if they let them. So you reach a point where you have to make a decision as to, am I going to let this be the defining feature of my life or not? Or am I going to move forward? You see it particularly with clients in very, very long marriages where divorce wasn't something they anticipated or expected, and the rug has very much been pulled out from under their feet, and they were getting to the stage of talking about retirement, maybe handing businesses over, grandchildren, that sort of thing, and they can see their life adopting an entirely different shape to that which they had expected. But as time passes, most of them will come to see that it may be a different shape, but that doesn't mean it's a bad shape. It's just different.
There must be more changes potentially, or more psychological distress and emotional distress going on in cases where there's sort of mistreatment of people within the marriage that has led to the breakdown of their relationship.
People treat each other appallingly. I don't think that, sadly, I don't think there's much that surprises me anymore. And people tolerate that treatment for many years because they don't want to acknowledge that somebody who they thought loved them and was committed to them will behave like that. They may well be told that it's their fault, that the mistreatment is a response to something they've done. You certainly see it in cases of domestic violence, where people have tolerated wholly inappropriate behaviour because they've been convinced that it was their fault. And in those cases, all you can do is just be side by side with them every step of the way. Because particularly if they've been in a relationship where there are strong elements of control, it's going to be really, really hard for them to break out from that, because they have been living with somebody who for many years has made them believe that they can't function without that person. And they may get to a point where they are quite clear that this isn't healthy, it isn't what they want. And they pluck up the courage to take a first step, and they take 2 tentative steps forward, and their ex responds with all the barrage of stuff that has always worked before. The opposition, I'm defending this because it isn't the right thing for our family. We don't, this shouldn't be happening to our family. You don't understand what is right for our family. And they'll have a massive wobble. And it's a step back. And then they've got to be ready to take another 2 baby steps forward. I looked after someone many years ago who had been in a very controlling relationship, and they had made attempts to leave that relationship before, but had always been pulled back because they had been left so much thinking that they were incapable of surviving outside that relationship. And when I finally got involved, it was with the assistance of a relative of theirs who had come into some money and said, I want to spend this money getting my relative free. This is what they need to do. I don't care what it costs. They are going to be phoning you 5 times a day because they will wobble and wobble every time they have some contact with their former spouse. They will wobble, and the former spouse will make darn sure that they find ways of just nitpicking away. There'll be something on social media. There'll be something said to the kids. And they will wobble, and I need you to be absolutely there. And so that's what we did. And we had everything. We had divorce. We had proceedings relating to the children. We had to have injunction proceedings to get my client left in peace. We had financial proceedings because that was another element of control, because the spouse could retain control by refusing to settle finances sensibly and making their partner go to court. We had the whole works, and it was horribly expensive. But at the end of it, the client sent me a letter saying, "Thank you for giving me my life back." And they have moved forward brilliantly since then, with far healthier relationships, both with their family and their friends and their children. And that's amazing.
It is amazing.
There will be some cases that will always stay with you because you can see that you are really making a difference.
Do you feel that you're part of a process which is, you're giving people strength to literally get their life back?
I very much hope I'm giving them strength because I am a buffer. I see a lot of clients who have come to me saying that their spouse doesn't want to involve solicitors and wants to talk it all out direct, and they are fearful that they don't feel strong enough to do that, that they are worried they will agree to something they didn't ought to agree to. Not that they're likely to be held to that, if they do, simply in conversations between them, but they feel vulnerable. And I say to them, well, obviously, if you feel able to have conversations, because the more you can sort out without paying me, the better. But at the same time, if you feel that you're being pulled and pressured into something that you don't feel comfortable with, feel free to refuse and put the blame on me and say, that your solicitor's told you not to do anything like this and she's a real old witch. And I don't mind, I've got broad shoulders. So I can act as a buffer for them.
Sure. So how much does money, finances, play a part in making the process difficult for people?
Enormously, because you are trying to carve two households out of one. The papers, the media all reports about the big money cases where people are divvying up their millions. Actually, those cases are much easier because there's plenty to go round. Particularly in the cost of living crisis, the difficulty is that people may have been struggling, a lot of people are struggling, to run one household. And the thought of how are we going to run two households on the same funds can make things very difficult indeed.
Yeah. How much does that contribute to the stress of the people going through it?
Oh, enormously. Particularly because, and we saw this when everything crashed in 2008, with when you're in a time of great financial pressure, whether it's cost of living, recession, people sometimes can't separate because they can't afford to separate, because they simply cannot afford to establish those two households. So they stay together. It may have well been financial pressures that have caused the fault lines in the relationship in the first place. And those fault lines deepen. And you've now got not only the original fault lines, but resentment that people aren't where they want to be. And in consequence, the tensions increase. And so by the time they get to a point where they can separate, potentially things are far less, I hate the word amicable, but I'll use that, communicative, constructive than they would have been otherwise. And I'm acutely conscious that I am an added expense in all of that. Sure. It's very tempting for people to try and resolve things without using somebody like me. And I can quite understand why they do, because it's one less cost. But the problem is that people are trying to resolve financial issues that could be potentially for the rest of their lives. And the position they can be in, if they go wrong, can be terrible. I have seen an awful lot of people. You have these online services who say they'll do your divorce for 50 quid. and I know people would say I would say this, but the adage about peanuts and monkeys absolutely holds true. They will assist you with getting a financial remedy order. That's an order that sorts out all claims between you. They won't tell you whether what you're getting is a good idea. They will simply translate into the appropriate paperwork what you have said you want. And I have had clients come to see me saying, it's finally sunk in what I've agreed to. I'm not sure this is fair. Am I stuck with it? And there are some cases, a lot of cases, in which absolutely they are.
But surely those cheaper options will work for people if people can communicate and there is no bitterness. I don't know how rare are those cases where people are just able to separate, they agree on what they agree on.
When they can, it's great. The problem you often see is that people don't know what they don't know. And what they think they're negotiating about may not be what's important. Pensions is a massive part of that. I hear a lot of people say, it was amicable till the lawyers got involved. And what that generally means is that the couple were having conversations between themselves. They reached what they thought was an agreement. One of them, probably the weaker financial party, is persuaded by family and friends, go and see a lawyer and just talk it through, one appointment, talk it through, make sure it's all right. So they come and see somebody like me and they tell me that their spouse is a policeman, a teacher, in the forces, works for Leonardo, that sort of thing, civil service. It's a long marriage. They've been in that job for a long time. And I said, what about their pension? Oh, they say it isn't worth anything and we don't need to worry about it. And I take a deep breath and explain to them that I really think that is something that needs to be looked at. Because, if you're in a long marriage and you make a decision that one of you is going to accrue a pension and focus on doing that, and the other isn't, because when it comes to retirement, you will share in the pension that your combined efforts have built up, why shouldn't you share it if you're not going to be together? And what generally happens then is that they push until they discover how much the pension is worth. They are then furious because they realise that their spouse was prepared to, as they see it, do them out of something very valuable that they were entitled to share in. Their spouse is furious because they got this close to doing it, and it's my fault. It was amicable till I got involved. All I've done is save somebody from themselves.
So better to be informed.
Better to be informed, yes. A lot of people think that divorce terminates all financial claims. It doesn't. All it does is end your marriage. If you want to sort out financial claims, you need to have what's called a financial remedy order, which can be made by agreement. A court can be asked to approve it, and provided it's satisfied it's fair, it will do so. And that doesn't require long and endless proceedings. If you don't have an order like that, then your claims remain open. I've read stats that suggest that only 1 in every 3 divorces actually ends with a financial remedy order. And that's really, really scary. And if anybody wants to know what the implications of that are, I would commend them the case of Vince and Wyatt, which involved Dale Vince, the ecotricity millionaire, who got divorced as a penniless hippie. And around 25 years later, when he was not a penniless hippie, his ex-wife came back and said, we never sorted out our finances. I'll have some of that, please.
So until something like that order is in place, you're still effectively tied in that way?
The claims are still there. They may never be pursued. But you can be fairly certain if you win the lottery or strike oil in your back garden, that it's likely to be queried.
Someone's coming for it.
Yeah.
So common patterns in people. You spoke about it being like a bereavement, grief. Mm-hmm. So people will go through a predictable curve, a predictable kind of path during the
fairly
process.
Predictable, because as I say, there will be the grief, the mourning, mm-hmm. the anger, the resentment, the blame. All of that is there. What you have to remember, though, is that the couple will be at different stages of that on that curve at different times, because it is unusual for a couple to both reach the decision that they want their marriage to end at the same time.
Yeah.
You will usually find that one partner has been thinking about this for some considerable time and has made the decision. The other may have had absolutely no inkling there was anything wrong, and it's a complete shock. And you have to bear that in mind. And you have to be prepared, I think, to flag that with your clients, so that you are saying, if you are looking after the one who is streets ahead and who's saying, why aren't we hearing from them? Why aren't we hearing from them? Why are they so slow? You have to be prepared to say to them, well, hang on a sec. They're still getting used to the whole idea of this. They are way behind on the curve. And if we push too hard, the likelihood is they're just going to retreat into their shell and shut down completely. You need to give them a bit of space. Yeah. And equally, if I'm looking after the person who's on the back of the curve, I've got to be prepared to help slow things down a bit, so that they have a bit of a chance to play catch up.
Sure.
You will find, though, that this idea that family lawyers are all at each other's throats is complete nonsense. We fight our clients' corner, we protect our clients' interests, we do our best to get the best outcome for our clients, but we talk to the solicitors on the other side. And we will often talk about, where our clients are emotionally. And it helps to know, so that you can factor that into how it doesn't change the advice you're giving to your client. But if you know that something is a particular hotspot and is going to take time to get over and difficult to talk about, you can say to your client, it's clear from talking to my opposite number that this is going to send all sorts of flags up. So we need to think carefully about how we say this, how we frame this, and be prepared for things to go quiet for a bit.
So have you worked on a case where you felt frustration because the person you're working with or representing is just not engaging and you're needing them to?
Yes, sometimes that will happen. They've got so much going on in their life that they can't find room for everything.
Of course, yeah.
So they decide the easiest thing not to find room for is me. And that's fine. I get that. But I have to say to them, you need to bear in mind that the emails are still going to keep coming from the solicitor on the other side. And what I don't want to do is just run up costs by chasing and niggling. If you really feel that you want to just go and sit under a rock for 6 months, maybe the better thing is to, halt your instructions to me so that I drop out of the picture for that time. But I have to warn them. I have to say to them that unless there is some level of understanding on the other side as to why you're doing this, it is possible that they will decide that they want to put a court timetable in place and start proceedings simply to get things moving. But that's just that's making clients aware and keeping them informed. They then make a decision as to how they want to play it.
What about people that have changed their mind?
Brilliant. You won't find any family lawyer who is anything other than delighted if a couple say, we've had a long thought about this wasn't the right decision, we're going to give it another go. Fabulous. Absolutely delighted.
How common is that?
It's not that common. People don't rush into seeing lawyers. Generally, by the time they get as far as someone like me, they've made decisions.
It's pretty much.
Yeah. But it happens, and it's brilliant when it does, and I wish them every happiness.
In terms of people's kind of personal growth and development, do you see a massive change in people through the process from when they come to you to when it's all kind of over and put to bed? Do you see this kind of new...
I suppose it depends on how long the process takes.
New birth of the person.
You will see them changing through the process because they are establishing a new independence, finding a new way of being, getting used to how their new life feels and looks. It's not necessarily a complete sea change, but you will see people change and develop. In most cases, as I said earlier, there will always be some people who are hell-bent on not doing that because they perceive that the decisions their spouse has taken, these are the cases where it's been the other party's decision to end the marriage. They perceive that their spouse has inflicted this situation on them and that their spouse has ruined their life. But I say again, only if you let them.
What about forgiveness? Do you see a lot of forgiveness?
Acceptance, probably, rather than forgiveness.
Why acceptance and not forgiveness?
I think because in most of the sort of cases that I think you're talking about, what has happened because one party has behaved badly. They've had affairs, they've dissipated the family finances, and whilst the person on the receiving end comes to accept their changed way of life, that doesn't mean that they necessarily forgive their spouse for the actions that caused it. Does that make sense?
It does. It does, yeah.
And also, you know, there are some people who, if they look at things really, if they can look at something really objectively, may well say, actually, I'm in a better place than I was. But forgiveness is a really big step still. Forgiveness is very, very powerful.
Very powerful. Very hard for some people.
Yeah.
How has your job, since you started it, changed your view of people? Or has it changed your view of people?
Well, certainly when I started doing this sort of work over 30 years ago, I had no conception of how appallingly people can treat each other. The rose-tinted spectacles are long gone.
Quite a shock then, initially.
Yes, I guess so. You know, you don't assume that people are blissfully happy and that everything's a bed of roses, but people can be really vile to each other, and that's not only that. You know, that's in the aftermath of the relationship breaking down. The desire to punish, and you know, the desire to lash out is something that you see a great deal of.
Why do you think that? Do you think that has something to do with going into that process, or coming out of it is like an outlet to then people trying to put like a final stab in, or things that they couldn't sort of face to say during their relationship?
Potentially sometimes. I think there are a lot of people who want to hurt as they have been hurt.
Yes.
You often see that with arrangements for children, tragically, that somebody may feel that the relationship between their former partner and their children is the only thing they can control, and they're going to punish them by controlling it. And it's tragic when that happens. It's not in any way in the children's best interests. And the reality is that the relationship in the long term that is likely to be harmed is the relationship between the children and the parent who is trying to frustrate them having a relationship with their other parent.
So I think you mentioned it earlier, control. So it's going to be a lot about control, isn't it? Because the entire world's falling apart.
Yes.
So, understandable. but very painful. It sounds very painful, the stuff you talk about. Is there is there one case that sticks out for you that you just think that was I still can't quite get my head around that I was part of that?
I suppose one of the cases I remember very vividly was when I was first qualified. And it was handed over to me by somebody else who said, I'm giving you this case. The client will say that her husband is a Nigerian chieftain and is likely to take all sorts of steps to try and prevent them getting divorced. I don't think there's anything in it. Which was certainly the most mistaken statement ever, because there was a lot in it. The client's husband was a Nigerian chieftain and was determined to do everything he could to frustrate our client getting divorced and an appropriate financial settlement in this country. So we had issues of a tribal divorce where he'd nailed a decree of divorce to a tree in her home village, which we were able to prove that since she hadn't been there for years because she was living in England, clearly couldn't stand. We then had the issue of him saying that they'd never been legally married, and her saying, we have, but the marriage certificate is in Nigeria. I know where it is, but I'm really frightened that he will destroy it. So the marriage certificate was smuggled out of Nigeria by a priest and brought over to where I was then working, and we were in court in London. And I took it up to London on the train. And I still remember that you could, doing the research that confirmed it was genuine, because they were torn out of a book. It wasn't like loads of certified copies that we can get.
Yeah.
They were torn out of a book, and the book had a set number of perforations in. So you could count the perforations to tell whether this was a genuine marriage certificate. And so we were able to present this evidence that there had been a genuine legal marriage in addition to the tribal marriage, and that she had standing to bring divorce proceedings. And with hindsight, just toddling up to London on the train with this thing in my briefcase was perhaps not the best idea. And it was one of those glorious cases that you can't quite work out how things happen. The husband then started saying that she would be able to get legal aid in Nigeria, so they should get divorced in Nigeria, where she was going to do a lot less well financially. And so I was tasked with, at very short notice, finding somebody who could advise on legal aid in Nigeria. And this was an overnight thing. We were in the middle of court proceedings, and I managed to find this barrister who would come to court. And as I said to our barrister, he seems to know about the Nigerian legal aid system, but it's a bit of a cross your fingers and wing it, because it was the best I could do at very short notice. And the other side's barrister said, on what basis do you feel qualified to comment on the Nigerian legal aid system? And he answered, I helped establish it. Which, and you just think, thank you.
Yeah.
See, there are some cases that stick in your memory. The one I outlined earlier, where the client wrote me a letter saying, thank you for giving me my life back.
Yeah.
That's one I will never forget.
Yeah.
And I am privileged because I get to meet amazing people at really crap times of their lives, and they trust me with their lives, or large aspects of their lives, helping them get to where they need to be. Not to, and my job, I'm not there to take their spouses to the cleaners. That's not what I'm there for. I am there to help them achieve the best possible outcome at the least possible cost, so that they can move forward with financial security. And I have an analogy that I use for my clients when they first come to see me, because they're really scared about doing this, because they're thinking, I'm in a horrible situation now, but is it going to be worse? Am I better off? Is it better the devil you know? Am I better off coping with where I am than launching into the unknown. And what I say to them is, I understand completely where you are. You feel like you're sat in the roller coaster. You're at the top and you're in the carriage and you don't know whether to push off or not, because you know that if you do push off, you're going to go through lots of twists and turns and you can't get off. And what I say to them is, yeah, that's absolutely true. It will be twisty and turny. There will be some bits where you really aren't enjoying it and it doesn't feel very nice. But you have to remember two things. One, the roller coaster ride always ends. And two, I'm sat in the car beside you. And I think that's what people need to know, that family law is different from any other sort of law because you are dealing with people's lives. And that means that you will on occasions talk about things that aren't really that legal at all, because that's what's important to your client at that moment. That's what they need you to know, because that's informing their thinking. It's informing their decision making. And for me, I need to be factoring that in to the advice I give them. It may not change the way the law works. It probably won't. But it helps me understand how I frame the advice I'm giving them because of what matters to them and what's particularly bothering them. And, sometimes we will have things that we need to get out of the way. We need to deal with bits of flotsam and jetsam before the client can actually focus on what they need to focus on. Sometimes I will have clients who want to make really, really bad decisions because they think, if I do this, that'll bring it to an end and it'll all go away. And I'm having to say to them, well, yes, we can do that, but let's look at where this leaves you 10 years down the line. Is that where you want to be? No. So we need to do something different. How can we make this happen? But it is a privilege to be able to work with people during a really awful time of their lives and very hopefully help them come out to something else. And I'm acutely aware that they are spending money on me that they have much, much better uses for.
Sure.
I try very hard to make sure that what I do is to add value so that if there are bits that they can do themselves, I will say by all means do it. Don't spend money on me doing stuff that you can do. And I think what's also important is that I make sure that right at the outset, I talk with them about what this is really going to cost, not what they hoped it was going to cost. If we do this way, this is going to cost X. If we do this way, it's going to cost Y. Armageddon, your worst case scenario, that's what it's going to cost. People think that what they want to do is to go to court, have their day in court. They know they're going to win and their spouse is going to be ordered to pay their costs. What I have to say to them is, yes, you can go to court, but the amount of information and understanding about your life that a judge at the final hearing 9 to 12 months down the line will have before they impose a decision on you that is going to affect the rest of your life, potentially, is pretty limited. And whatever the outcome, it is highly unlikely that they will order either of you to make any contribution to each other's legal costs. So every decision you make, you need to make on the assumption that you are paying for it, because that's the only sensible way of approaching it. Mm. How much better is it to have an outcome that you have had input into and which probably certainly won't be perfect, but which you can live with, you can move forward with, and which hasn't cost you money that you could much better spend on something else.
Back to being in the role, in the job that you do. Do you think that lawyers would benefit from supervision? So we spoke at the beginning about vicarious trauma. Do you think that that's something they would benefit from? Because it does sound a lot to potentially carry and take on sometimes, maybe for some people. So I'm just wondering if you think they would benefit.
I have to say I've never tried it, but that may be a fault in me rather than an indication that it's not needed. It's certainly very much a growing movement. A lot of specialist family law firms will provide regular practice supervision and guidance and support for their lawyers. I think for the generation coming through who are only ever going to have worked with the client being able to get to you 24/7, 365. I think it probably really is tremendously important. For the old bats like me, it may be a bit late. You know, we've found our own way of coping with it. I don't know, never say never. It's not something I've ever tried. It's certainly something that the judiciary are very well aware of, in that they are making clear that, you know, when judges say to people as they come out of court, I want that order submitted, a draft order submitted by X time, they need to be actually thinking about, does that mean the lawyer's going to be up half the night drafting it?
Yeah. Yeah.
We need to be kind to each other and to ourselves.
We certainly do. What would you say to someone considering going into family law now?
You'll never be bored. You will meet some amazing people. You will learn a lot about human nature. You will learn a lot about yourself. Make sure from the outset that you protect yourself. I think the 2-phone system should be mandatory because it makes such a difference. There will be times when you will just want to cry because you can't believe that people are so hideous to each other. There will be times when you will be so taken aback that there's nothing you can do but laugh. But ultimately what you are there for is to take care of your clients and to support your clients. It's a hackneyed phrase, but they are on a journey. And you've got to be on the journey with them. And if what you want is to see cases as a transactional basis, you know, you start one, you finish one, you start one, you finish one, don't go into family law, because the twists and turns are always going to be there. It will be a journey. And sometimes the journey will go up cul-de-sacs round the bend. But you've got to be there alongside.
Got to go with it.
Yep.
Well, Kit O'Brien, it's been a fascinating insight into family law. Thank you.
My pleasure.